So now we're coming into the 2000s. What are your memories of 9/11, September 11th, 2001?
At that time, I was in class. A bunch of us were trying to get our drill sergeant certification and become drill sergeants. And at that time, we were sitting in class and we heard about 9/11, and a lot of us said, hey, we want to transfer back to the infantry. And we'll cancel our drill sergeant's training and let us go back to the infantry units and deal with this. At that time, if I remember correctly, I think I was at home when the towers got hit. And we were just getting ready to report for drill sergeant school the next day.
Wow.
So when I had just got off of work and watched the video, or the news feed, and I knew right away that was no accident when that plane hit that first tower.
All right.
And when we got to our drill sergeant unit for training, that's when a lot of us stood up and said, hey, we want to go back to the infantry. That's game over. We know what's fixing to happen.
Yeah. Right, yeah. I was teaching that day, and the students wanted me to tell them what was going on. I said, I have no idea, but I do know somebody's going to get bombed. Right? I mean, you know there's going to be a response to it. Yeah. And that happened? You went back to the infantry?
At that time, no, they wouldn't release us. So at that time, I just said that I'm going to the military police. They're going to go ahead, and I transferred from the National Guard to the reserve unit.
Okay, so you didn't become a drill instructor then?
No.
Yeah. You serve in both, the war on terrorism, of course, is global now, but the two major sites, Afghanistan and Iraq, and you went to both of those places. Before I ask you first about Afghanistan, what was the difference in the training like? I'm thinking about Cold War, war on terrorism. Cold War, the idea is kind of traditional warfare.
Right.
Big army there, big army here, and if we are tomorrow where they are today, we're winning, that kind of thing. Very different kind of warfare in Afghanistan and Iraq. How would you characterize the key differences in training for the Cold War, the Soviet Union, and the war on terrorism?
The Cold War, we basically knew who our enemies were. They were in uniform, their equipment. We were able to identify who was a foe, who was not a foe by their equipment, by the aircraft. We were doing a lot of training on chemical and biological warfare, nuclear warfare. If you had a detonation of a bomb over here, what the unit would require to do to decontaminate, protect yourself against that. What kind of vehicles the enemy would be using, what kind of weapons we would be using against them. With the war on terror, it's almost like a little bit of Korean warfare, Vietnam warfare. You don't know who your enemy is, but you know the weapons. But you don't know their tactics, where they're at all times. With Russia, we basically knew where they were coming from, the direction they were coming from. With the war on terrorism, the Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, you could be walking down the street or being patrolled in the street in your vehicle, or walking patrol in the city or a village. You could be walking right by them and you wouldn't know it.
You wouldn't know it. There's a picture you have where there's a group of kids, and they look like cute kids. There's a military vehicle in the background. Those look like nice, cute kids, but when you're in Afghanistan, when you're in Iraq, were you sure that you could even trust those kids?
A lot of the kids really did like us because we would have PR people with us, public relations officers, females or males, and they would be able to talk to the people, sit down with them at some of the council meetings, and explain to them what we're doing there and why we're there. So it was kind of a two-way street. They understood us, they understood what we were there for. A lot of kids liked us because usually on my vehicle I carried candy with them. I had my medic with them in case one of them was hurt. We would get a kind of a rapport with them. He would treat them, talk to them. I'd have my interrogator talk to them. Sometimes I would get the teddy bears and stuff like that, or soccer balls.
Yeah.
Make sure I had them from the public relations office.
Right.
School supplies that they could use.
Yeah.
So yeah, we had a good rapport with the kids. It was the hardcore ones that grew up under Saddam Hussein or the Taliban that we had a little bit of a, we need to watch him, need to keep an eye on him while we're out here doing what we're doing.
Yeah. What was your, you go to Afghanistan in 2004, and you do a year tour, is that right?
Yes.
In Afghanistan? What was your job in Afghanistan?
I was assigned to the Bagram Air Base there, which is a large air base just north of Kabul. That was being operated by the Soviet Union when they were there, so we took over the base.
Yeah.
My job was base security and also outside patrol of the wire, to talk with the villagers, keep patrols going outside, keep them away from the air base so they wouldn't mortar us or rocket us during the time we were there.
Were you always successful?
We were. Once we were outside the wire and we were running patrols, and I was running patrols out there, we would go out maybe about 2 kilometers out, which was basically their distance from shooting at us, especially with rockets and mortars. And we were doing that quite successfully until the next commander from another unit came on board, and they were doing a rotation. He pulled us back inside the wire. He didn't want us going outside the wire. The only time we would go is when we would go from Bagram Air Base down to Kabul to the embassy, and we would just patrol the MSR route between those two places.
What's the MSR?
The major supply route between the military installation and Kabul.
Yeah.
After that, it seemed like all of a sudden we were starting getting rockets in and we were getting mortared.
Because you're not patrolling that area.
We're not outside the wire doing what we should have been doing.
Yeah.
And it was constantly at nighttime they would do it. One night they were dropping mortars in one of the mountain regions outside the gate to the northeast. And at that time we put up we had aircraft above us, which were basically patrolling outside anyway. Either a Predator or a gunship. And one night they started getting quite a bit of rockets in and mortars in, and they called in a C-130 Charlie, which is a gunship.
Yeah.
It's an airborne gun platform, basically.
Yeah.
And he lit that mountainside up.
Wow.
So it was fun watching it.
That took care of that, yeah. When you were there, you said you took over an old Soviet base. Did you see, what's the right word, did you see remnants of the Soviet presence when you were there? What kind of stuff did you see?
While we were there, they had moved all the wreckage off the runway so we can get our aircraft in, and they put them in a boneyard, which is to the west of us.
Yeah.
So while we were patrolling inside the perimeter of the air base, we would go constantly by the boneyard and look at the MiGs that were kind of shredded.
The old Soviet MiGs.
And while we were out, when I was outside the wire doing patrols in the area, we were also relaying information back of stockpiles of tanks, BMPs that we would run across.
What's a BMP?
BMP is a personnel carrier that was a Russian vehicle.
Yeah.
We found a lot of them in a park.
Wow.
T-72 tanks, or T-62 tanks, there was a lot of them piled up. We took photographs. I took the grid coordinates of where they were located at and talked to the individual who owned the land there. And we basically got to look at them, make sure there was no weapons. They were still not active with artillery rounds in them, gun rounds or anything like that.
Yeah.
And we got to see one of the villages where they had a tank sitting in the middle of it, which basically was their monument. they kept it.
Yeah.
But it was inoperational because it got blown up.
When you're seeing this old Soviet stuff, and the Soviet military in the 80s, you know, not as tough as the American military in the 80s, but still pretty tough, and not as tough as the American military in the 2000s, but still pretty tough. When you saw that Soviet stuff and realized after a decade the Soviets had been chased out of Afghanistan, did that make you wonder how things would go for... Of course, it's not just American war in Afghanistan, right? You got troops from all around the world with NATO in Afghanistan, but did that ever make you wonder how is this going to go in Afghanistan? If the Soviets got chased out after a decade, how about us? Did you ever have that kind of thought?
I didn't think we were going to get chased out like Afghanistan, the Russians did. Because Russians, They were basically annihilating villages. They were dropping landmines all over the place. We had people going in with international forces, and they were finding these landmines, and kids were stepping on them. Families were stepping on them when they were out with their sheep and goats and stuff like that. It was constantly, we'd have somebody show up at the main gate looking for medical aid because the kid stepped on a landmine or was injured by a landmine.
Yeah.
And they appreciated us because we were clearing the landmines up. We were getting rid of them.
More of a focus on the hearts and minds part
basically,
of that.
and we were trying to we were doing a lot of rebuilding too in the communities. We would go in, we'd bring in a contractor, he would build a school, build a hospital, try to get their electrical back, integrated utilities back on, drill water wells for them, stuff like that.
Did you get out into Afghan society much? Were you able to go into villages and towns, and or even into Kabul itself and see what it was like? Yeah,
we did get to go into Kabul several times. In fact, I got to see the soccer stadium where you would see in the propaganda films where the Taliban would take people in and execute them in the soccer field. I got to see the palace that the president occupied before he was executed and his family was executed. And how devastated the palace was. A lot of their historical statues, monuments, museums were destroyed because the Taliban does not want any of that there. We would hand out emergency radios to the people so they can listen to the broadcasts, and they were amazed that we were handing them electronics when the Taliban would take it, bash it, crash it, trash the whole thing. So it was
And how would you describe, just whatever you saw of Afghan daily life? Just how would you describe what the culture looked like?
The culture was still controlled basically by the Shiite law. You would very rarely see any women outside without cover and without a man escort. A lot of their automobiles were gone, so they were using horse-drawn carriages or mule carts. They were starting to come back. You could see some vehicles start to show up. You could see some of the shops open up. In fact, we would go down and spend some money in their shops to help their economy and boost their economy. Or we allowed a lot of their flea market personnel on our base after they went through a security checkpoint, take a look at their stuff they were bringing on to make sure it was anything that was illegal or had a bomb in it. And they would come show up every Friday, and we would buy a lot of their merchandise, a lot of their gifts and jewelry and stuff to send back home.
Did you have the feeling that, Afghanistan, just based on what you saw, did you have the feeling that Afghanistan had what it took to be able to stand on its own as a functional country?
They were trying, but I think there's still a lot of insurgents there that are in plain uniforms. Some of them joined the military to get fed, fattened up, weapons training. They would go AWOL, join back up at the Taliban somewhere, and use that information that they obtained and use it against us there at the bases.
It's almost like it's a warrior culture, right?
It is.
And so we're going to be fighting somebody. If it's not the Russians, it's the Americans or the Canadians, and if it's not them, it's each other, right? Am I wrong? I don't know. That's kind of my impression.
There's a lot of villages out there that don't want that. They want the protection of the military. They want the protection of the Afghan forces, the Afghan police. It's trying to get them trained up and getting them out of that mindset that you can live in peace, you can live with your brothers. With Afghanistan, there's so many tribal sects in that area. And each chieftain was in charge of his sect or his tribal area. So trying to bring them together and come one accord, that's where we're having a little bit of a problem.
What is your feeling these days when you hear that the U.S. government is negotiating with the Taliban, basically conceding that the Taliban is going to have significant influence in Afghanistan? after all this time.
That one is, I'm not a politician, but it's kind of rubs me a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I've seen what they can do. You give them a piece of the pie, then they want more of the pie.
Yeah.
And then you have their insurgents going out and taking out your competition. Now you've got the whole pie.
Yeah.
You're just not happy with just a little bit of it or half of
Right.
it.